Imagine waking up every single day knowing that someone out there is waiting for you. Not because you owe them anything. Not because they're family. But because for 1 year straight, you became the only person who saw them as human. Now imagine discovering that the person you thought had nothing actually had everything. And the moment you find out, 3 black SUVs pull up, men in suits step out, and suddenly the homeless man you fed every morning is standing straighter than you've ever seen him. Would you feel proud? Confused? Betrayed? Or would you wonder if kindness was ever about knowing who deserves it? What happened on that Tuesday morning changed everything Evelyn thought she knew about compassion, identity, and why we help people when no one's keeping score. And before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This isn't a fairy tale. This is about a 58-year-old widow from Cleveland, Ohio, who did something most of us think about doing but rarely follow through on. She helped someone. Not once. Not twice. But every single day for over a year. And what she discovered in return wasn't what she expected. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was something far more complicated. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and for most of her adult life, she lived invisibly. A retired school librarian. A woman whose husband died from a heart attack 6 years earlier while mowing the lawn on a Sunday afternoon. A mother whose only son, Marcus, lived in Seattle with his wife and 2 children she saw maybe twice a year if flights were affordable. Evelyn's apartment was small, neat, and painfully quiet. It sat above a dry cleaning business on Maple Street, where the smell of starch and steam rose through the floorboards every morning at 5. She had no pets. No close friends. Her days revolved around routines that kept her moving because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling the weight of everything she'd lost. So she walked. Every morning at 6, she'd leave her apartment, walk 4 blocks to Harper's Diner, order oatmeal with honey, black coffee, and 1 extra turkey sausage breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil to go. The waitress, Diane, never asked why. But Diane knew. Because 5 blocks east of that diner, on the corner of 4th and Ashland, there was a man everyone had learned to ignore. He sat on the same green bench beneath a faded bus stop sign that hadn't seen a bus in 3 years. People called him different things. The corner ghost. The quiet one. That guy. But no one called him by his name because no one had ever asked. He didn't shout for change. Didn't hold up signs. Didn't rattle a cup. He just sat there, hands folded in his lap, wearing a brown wool coat that had seen better decades, and shoes so worn you could see his socks through the soles. His face was weathered, deep lines around his eyes and mouth, the kind you get from years of sun, cold, and survival. His hair was gray, messy, but not wild. He looked like someone who once cared about appearance and was still trying to hold on to a shred of that dignity. And there was something in his eyes. A sharpness. A sadness. Like he was watching the world from somewhere far away, somewhere the rest of us couldn't reach. Evelyn noticed him one morning in late September. She'd walked past that corner 100 times, but that day, for reasons she still couldn't explain, she stopped. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there holding the warm foil-wrapped sandwich in her hand, feeling foolish. He looked up slowly. Their eyes met. And for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Good morning. I thought you might be hungry." She held out the sandwich. The old man stared at it like he wasn't sure it was real. Then his hand reached out, trembling slightly, and he took it. His fingers brushed hers for just a second, and she felt how cold they were. He looked at her with an expression she would never forget. Gratitude. But also surprise. Like he hadn't been spoken to kindly in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, but clear. Educated, even. That caught her off guard. She nodded, smiled a little, and walked away. That was all. No big moment. No tears. No promises. Just a sandwich and 2 words. But the next morning, Evelyn bought 2 breakfasts again. And the morning after that. And the one after that. It became part of her routine. Walk to the diner. Order her oatmeal. Order his sandwich. Walk to the corner. Hand it over. Exchange a few words. Sometimes he said thank you. Sometimes he said good morning. Sometimes he said nothing at all. And Evelyn never pushed. Weeks passed. October came, then November. The mornings got colder. Evelyn started bringing him coffee too, black, no sugar. One morning she brought him gloves. Another time, a scarf. He accepted everything with that same quiet dignity, but he never asked for more. And she never asked him why he was there. It felt invasive. It felt unnecessary. Because whatever his story was, it was his. And her job wasn't to fix him. It was just to see him. But the neighborhood noticed. A woman at the diner once leaned over and whispered, "Honey, you know he's probably just gonna sell whatever you give him, right?" Evelyn didn't respond. Another morning, a man in a suit waiting for his takeout coffee shook his head and said, "You're encouraging him. People like that need to help themselves." Evelyn looked at him and said calmly, "People like what?" The man didn't answer. But the comments stuck with her. Not because they hurt. But because they reminded her how easy it is to decide someone isn't worth your time. How simple it is to walk past suffering and call it someone else's problem. Evelyn had taught middle school kids for 30 years. She knew that every single person had a story. And most of the time, the loudest judgments came from people who'd never bothered to ask. By December, something had shifted. The old man started talking more. Not about himself, but about small things. The weather. A bird he'd seen. A memory of a restaurant that used to be on that block 20 years ago. Evelyn learned he had a good memory. A sharp mind. And a gentleness in the way he spoke that didn't match the roughness of his appearance. One snowy morning, she asked him, "Do you want to sit inside the diner? It's warmer." He shook his head. "I'm all right here." She didn't push. But she wondered. Was it pride? Shame? Or something else? On Christmas Eve, Evelyn brought him a full meal. Turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, all packed neatly in a container from her own kitchen. She'd cooked it the night before, alone in her apartment, and realized she had no one to share it with. So she brought it to him. He looked at the container, then at her, and for the first time, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't say anything. Just nodded. She sat with him on the bench for a few minutes, neither of them speaking, watching the morning light spread across the empty street. It was one of the quietest, most peaceful moments she'd had in years. January arrived. Then February. A full year had passed. Evelyn had bought the man breakfast over 300 times. And in all that time, she never asked his name. He never offered it. It didn't seem to matter. But one cold morning in early March, something changed. She arrived at the corner at her usual time, sandwich and coffee in hand. But the bench was empty. No coat. No bag. No sign of him. Evelyn's chest tightened. She looked around. Asked a man sweeping the sidewalk if he'd seen him. The man shrugged. Haven't seen him in 2 days. 2 days turned into 3. Then 4. Evelyn kept coming, kept hoping. But the bench stayed empty. She felt something she didn't expect. Not just concern. But loss. Real, aching loss. She hadn't realized how much those few minutes every morning had meant to her. How much his presence had become a part of her life. She started to fear the worst. That he'd gotten sick. That he'd died alone somewhere. That she'd never know what happened. And the guilt crept in. Why hadn't she asked more questions? Why hadn't she tried harder to help him? What if he needed her and she wasn't there? On the 7th morning, Evelyn stood at the corner, staring at the empty bench, holding a now cold coffee. And that's when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. It was him. Standing there. Alive. But different. His coat was cleaner. His posture straighter. His eyes clearer. Evelyn exhaled in relief. I thought something happened to you. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I'm sorry I worried you. His voice was steadier than usual. Warmer. He took the coffee from her hands and said, tomorrow morning. Please don't come. Evelyn blinked. What? Just for tomorrow, he said. I need you to trust me. She wanted to ask why. Wanted to understand. But something in his tone made her stop. So she nodded. That night, Evelyn barely slept. She lay awake wondering what she'd done wrong. Whether she'd overstepped. Whether this was his way of ending things gently. But something in her gut told her to listen. So the next morning, she didn't go to the diner. She didn't buy breakfast. Instead, she stood across the street from the corner, half hidden behind a lamppost, watching. The street was quiet. A few cars passed. A jogger. A delivery truck. And then, at exactly 6:12, she heard them. Engines. Low, smooth, expensive. 3 black SUVs turned onto the street, moving slowly, deliberately. They stopped directly in front of the bench. Evelyn's heart pounded. The doors opened. Men stepped out. 4 of them. All wearing dark suits, crisp white shirts, polished shoes. They weren't police. They weren't paramedics. They looked like security. Like executives. And then the old man stood up. He didn't look startled. Didn't look afraid. He looked like he'd been expecting them. One of the men approached him, spoke quietly, and handed him something. A phone. The old man took it, listened for a moment, then nodded. Evelyn couldn't breathe. What was happening? Who was this man? Then one of the suited men turned and looked directly at her. He walked across the street, calm and professional, and stopped a few feet away. Ma'am, he said politely, are you Evelyn Carter? She froze. How do you know my name? The man smiled gently. Because he's been talking about you for weeks. He gestured back toward the old man. He'd like to speak with you. If you're willing. Evelyn's legs felt weak, but she nodded. She crossed the street slowly. The old man turned to face her. And when he spoke, his voice was different. Confident. Clear. My name is Henry Blackwell, he said. Evelyn stared. The name was familiar. She'd heard it before. Seen it maybe. But she couldn't place it. Henry continued. 3 years ago, I lost my son. His name was David. He was 32. A lawyer. Brilliant, kind, everything a father could hope for. He died in a car accident on his way to visit me. And when he died, something inside me died too. His voice cracked, but he steadied himself. I stopped trusting people. Stopped believing the world had any good left. I'd spent 40 years building companies, making money, shaking hands with people who only saw my wallet. So I walked away. Evelyn's mouth was dry. She still didn't fully understand. Henry looked her in the eyes. I wanted to know if anyone would care about me if I had nothing. If I wasn't Henry Blackwell, founder of Blackwell Industries. If I was just a man on a bench. So I disappeared. I left everything. I lived on that corner for 14 months. And in all that time, do you know how many people stopped? He paused. 6. And 5 of them wanted something. A photo. A story. Proof they helped the needy so they could post it online. His eyes softened. But you. You stopped because I was hungry. Not because you knew who I was. Evelyn felt tears on her face before she realized she was crying. I didn't know, she whispered. I know, Henry said. That's why it mattered. One of the men stepped forward. Mr. Blackwell, the car is ready. Henry nodded but didn't move yet. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to Evelyn. This is for you. Not as payment. But as gratitude. Evelyn shook her head. I don't want anything. Henry smiled. I know. But please. Open it later. She took the envelope, hands shaking. Henry looked at her one last time. You gave me something no one else could. You reminded me that people still care. That kindness still exists. And that my son's belief in humanity wasn't foolish. He turned and walked toward the SUV. Evelyn stood frozen, watching as the door closed and the vehicles pulled away, disappearing around the corner as quietly as they'd come. She stood there for a long time, clutching the envelope, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note and a single key. The note read, "The new community center on Ashland opens next month. It's called the Carter Corner. You'll always have a place there. And so will everyone you've ever seen. Thank you for seeing me. Henry." Evelyn collapsed onto the bench and wept. Not from shock. Not from disbelief. But from the overwhelming weight of realizing that the smallest act, repeated with consistency and love, could mean everything to someone. She hadn't saved Henry's life. But she'd reminded him it was worth living. 6 weeks later, the Carter Corner opened. It wasn't flashy. No red carpets or news cameras. Just a warm building with free meals, job resources, counseling, and a quiet space for anyone who needed it. Evelyn volunteered there 3 days a week. She never told anyone the full story. She didn't need to. Henry visited once, unannounced, in a baseball cap and jeans. They had coffee. Talked about small things. He asked about her son. She asked about his recovery. It was peaceful. Simple. Human. When he left, he hugged her and said, "Thank you for not treating me like I was invisible." She smiled. "Thank you for letting me see you." And that was it. No drama. No grand gestures. Just two people who reminded each other that we all matter. That dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you give. And sometimes, the richest thing you can offer someone is your presence. So let me ask you something. If you passed someone every single day and they had nothing, would you stop? And if you did stop, would it be because you hoped for something in return, or because you believed they deserved to be seen? What would you have done if you were Evelyn? Would you have kept going every morning, not knowing who he was, not knowing if it mattered? And how would you feel right now if you found out the person you ignored last week turned out to be someone extraordinary? Does that change whether they deserved your kindness? Or does it just reveal how often we decide who's worth our time based on what we think they can give us?